Throughout human history, medicine has been a double-edged sword, part miracle, part mystery. Long before the advent of science-based healthcare, people around the world relied on a combination of superstition, ritual, and bold experimentation to heal the body and mind. And while some early medical interventions laid the groundwork for modern medicine, others ranged from the oddly inventive to the outright horrifying. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, let us take you on a journey through the shadowy corridors of medical history, where belief often overruled biology, and cures were sometimes worse than the disease. These are the most bizarre medical practices in history. Relax, settle in, and allow yourself to be lulled into a gentle slumber as we explore a world of bloodletting, humours, trepanation, and more. Part 1. The Roots of Ancient Medicine. We begin in the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. Thousands of years ago, healing was not the domain of physicians as we know them today, but rather the work of priests and mystics. Illness was believed to be a form of divine punishment or the work of malevolent spirits. To cure someone was to perform a ritual, a sacred act of expelling evil. One common practice in ancient Mesopotamia was incantation therapy. The healer would recite elaborate prayers to the gods, call upon sacred names, and perform symbolic gestures. These rituals were often accompanied by physical remedies, herbs mixed into thick pastes, animal parts ground into powders, or minerals added to ointments. While some treatments may have had actual medicinal properties, many were purely symbolic, like writing the name of a disease on a clay tablet and then smashing it as a way to banish the illness. In Egypt, medicine was far more advanced, though still steeped in mysticism. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating back to around 1600 BCE, outlines various treatments for wounds and injuries. Yet even in Egypt, physicians were guided by spiritual ideas. Diseases were attributed to blockages in the body's internal channels, similar to the Nile River's flow. As such, purging the body became a central focus, through vomiting, bleeding, or laxatives. But it's not just what ancient civilizations believed, it's what they did. Consider trepanation, the practice of drilling or scraping a hole into the human skull. Found in numerous cultures, from the Andes to sub-Saharan Africa, this procedure was often done to release evil spirits, treat seizures, or relieve pressure in the brain. No anesthesia, no antiseptic, just a sharp stone and courage. Shockingly, some patients survived, evidenced by bone healing around the trepanation site. Then there's Hippocrates, often called the father of modern medicine. Living in ancient Greece around 400 BCE, he proposed the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to Hippocratic medicine, illness resulted from imbalances among these fluids. The remedy: restore balance, sometimes with gentle means, often with drastic ones. One such method was bloodletting. If a patient had a fever, it meant they had too much blood, so out it went. Leeches, knives, or cupping instruments were used. This idea would persist for centuries, influencing medical thought well into the 19th century. Ancient India also had its own holistic medical system, Ayurveda. Here, the balance was between three doshas: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Treatments ranged from dietary changes to herbal tonics to cleansing rituals, known as panchakarma. These included emesis therapy, oil enemas, and nasal irrigation. To a modern observer, these might sound strange, but Ayurveda had a structured, coherent system, sometimes more humane than its Western counterparts. Over in China, traditional Chinese medicine centered around the flow of qi, or life energy, through meridians in the body. Acupuncture, herbal remedies, and breathing exercises aim to restore harmony. Although based on pre-scientific concepts, many elements of traditional Chinese medicine are still practiced today. Yet not all ancient treatments were so elegant. In Rome, for instance, gladiator blood was considered a cure for epilepsy. It was believed that the strength and vitality of the fighter could be absorbed by the patient. Drinking the blood of a fallen warrior was not just symbolic, it was a literal attempt to take on his life force. Medieval misconceptions and monastic medicine. As we transition into the medieval period, the boundaries between faith, superstition, and medicine blur even further. Europe, gripped by the influence of the Church, saw medicine as inseparable from theology. Disease was punishment for sin, and healing was a matter of divine intervention as much as it was of bodily treatment. Monasteries became centers of healing. Monks preserved ancient medical texts, grew medicinal herbs in cloistered gardens, and offered rudimentary care to the sick and poor. But their knowledge was limited, filtered through religious doctrine and a medieval understanding of the human body that still revolved around the four humours. Remedies were often based on the writings of Galen, a Greek physician whose theories had become gospel. One common belief was that the position of the stars influenced health. Medical astrology flourished, with physicians consulting star charts before administering treatment. Certain ailments were thought to be ruled by specific zodiac signs, and treatment was postponed or prescribed based on celestial alignments. But the bizarre flourished most during times of fear, none more so than during the Black Death. The bubonic plague swept across Europe in the 14th century, killing millions. With no knowledge of bacteria or contagion, people turned to the irrational. Some doctors wore long, bird-like masks filled with aromatic herbs, believing the scent would protect them from miasma or bad air. These plague doctors have become iconic, their beaked masks a symbol of both desperation and illusion. Flagellants wandered from town to town, whipping themselves in public displays of penance, believing their suffering could appease God and end the plague. Others turned to more literal purgation, bleeding, blistering, or applying live animals to wounds. One treatment for boils involved placing a live toad on the swelling. The idea was that the toad would absorb the poison. In some versions, the toad was split open, and its innards applied directly to the skin. Equally alarming was the use of animal dung as medicine. Goose droppings, sheep feces, and cow manure were all used in poultices. These mixtures were believed to draw out infection or stimulate healing. Surgical practices were equally gruesome. Without anesthesia or sterilization, procedures were brutal and often fatal. Barbers, yes, those who cut hair, often doubled as surgeons. Known as barber surgeons, they performed tooth extractions, bloodletting, lancing of abscesses, and even amputations. A red and white striped pole became their symbol, the red for blood, the white for bandages. For dental pain, the options were limited and horrifying. In addition to tooth pulling, some patients had their teeth cauterized with hot irons or drilled without any form of sedation. Tooth worms, believed to cause decay and pain, were sometimes lured out with foul-smelling substances or crushed by inserting heated metal. Mental illness was not spared from the bizarre. Those suffering from schizophrenia, epilepsy, or what we might now recognize as depression, were thought to be possessed by demons. The solution? Exorcism. In some cases, the afflicted were subjected to torture under the guise of spiritual purification. Trepanation was revived, again used in hopes of releasing the evil spirits believed to dwell within the skull. Then came the widespread use of urine diagnosis. Physicians carried urine charts and scent wheels, diagnosing patients based on the color, clarity, smell, and even taste of their urine. A sample might be described as milky with floating clouds, signaling disease in the spleen, or red with a sediment of gravel, indicating kidney stones. Despite the horror, The Middle Ages weren't devoid of genuine care or progress. Monastic hospitals laid the groundwork for future medical institutions, and some herbal remedies, like the use of willow bark for pain, would prove scientifically sound centuries later. But for every reasonable attempt at healing, there were 10 more strange, ritualistic, or outright dangerous practices. The line between medicine and magic was thin, and desperation often trumped reason. Renaissance remedies and the rise of the odd. The Renaissance, a period of rebirth, art, and rediscovery. Across Europe, old texts were unearthed, ancient wisdom re-examined, and curiosity reawakened. Yet even with the flowering of reason, many bizarre medical practices persisted, and in some cases, flourished. The four humours were still a dominant theory, but new explanations began to emerge. Paracelsus, a Swiss physician and alchemist, rejected the old ideas in favour of a more chemical approach. He believed that illness was caused not by imbalanced humours, but by the presence of poisons, and he often treated them with more poison. Mercury, arsenic, and lead became common ingredients in Renaissance pharmacology. Mercury was especially popular as a cure for syphilis, which had emerged in Europe as a terrifying new plague. Patients were subjected to mercury rubs, vapor baths, and even mercury pills. The treatments often killed them faster than the disease. Doctors during this time were also captivated by the idea of sympathetic magic, the notion that like affects like. One particularly strange remedy was the weapon salve. If someone was injured by a sword, the doctor would not treat the wound directly. Instead, he would clean the weapon that caused the injury, believing that healing the object would heal the flesh. This theory was championed by Sir Kenelm Digby, who swore it worked. Alchemy heavily influenced Renaissance medicine. Physicians experimented with distillation, tinctures, and powdered metals. Some alchemists tried to create the philosopher's stone, not just a substance to turn lead into gold, but one believed to cure all disease and grant eternal life. While they never succeeded, their laboratories laid the foundations for modern chemistry and pharmacology. Then there was mummy medicine. Yes, quite literally, ground-up Egyptian mummies were believed to have healing powers. The resin used to preserve the bodies, combined with the remains themselves, was thought to contain magical properties. Apothecaries sold mumia as a treatment for bruises, epilepsy, and internal bleeding. In time, European grave robbers began selling fresh corpses as substitutes when mummies became scarce. Other treatments from this era were equally grim. Human fat was considered a remedy for joint pain. Executioners sometimes sold the fat of hanged criminals to doctors and apothecaries. There was even a belief that the touch of a king could cure disease. This led to the royal touch, in which monarchs would lay hands on the sick, especially those with scrofula, a form of tuberculosis. Charles II of England reportedly touched over 90,000 people during his reign in an attempt to cure them. The Renaissance also brought new attention to anatomy. Dissection, once forbidden, was increasingly practiced in universities. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci drew detailed renderings of the human body based on cadaver studies. These anatomical drawings were revolutionary, but obtaining bodies often required grave robbing or dealing with criminals' corpses. Anatomy theatres became public spectacles, where people gathered to watch dissections like they were plays. In dentistry, things were hardly more advanced. Toothaches continued to be a source of immense suffering. Dental tools included pliers, hammers, and chisels. Some barbers and travelling quacks set up booths at fairs and markets, where they pulled teeth in front of cheering crowds. For cavities, they might pour boiling oil into the tooth or cauterize it with a red-hot iron. For those experiencing melancholy or hysteria, treatments were wide-ranging. Hysteria, considered a condition exclusive to women, was believed to be caused by a wandering womb. Treatments included fumigating the lower body with perfumes or burning herbs in an attempt to lure the uterus back into place. Some physicians prescribed marriage or pregnancy as a cure. Leeches remained in vogue. Applied to the skin to draw out bad blood, they were considered a more refined form of bloodletting. Wealthier patients might even have leech collections with carefully bred and raised specimens for their personal use. Leeches became so essential that they were imported across borders and guarded like medical gold. Despite the horror and eccentricity, there were glimmers of progress. Doctors began using antiseptic herbs, started recognizing patterns in disease transmission, and explored the circulatory system with new seriousness. But for most people, medicine still involved equal parts terror and hope, an act of faith in a practitioner wielding knives, potions, and incantations. As the Renaissance marched forward, Europe was gripped by a fervor of inquiry, but superstition still hung in the air like a lingering fog. Even as medical schools emerged and scientific study gained traction, the everyday experience of medicine remained raw, sometimes cruel, and often bizarre. One fascinating yet troubling phenomenon was the urine wheel, an actual diagnostic chart that matched the color, clarity, and taste of urine to various ailments. Doctors would observe a patient's urine in glass flasks and even smell or sip it. A sweet taste might indicate diabetes, while a strong odor could signal an infection. While odd to modern ears, it was a method rooted in close observation and, surprisingly, sometimes effective. Another bizarre belief was the healing power of gemstones. Amethysts were thought to protect against drunkenness, sapphires against poison, and emeralds against epilepsy. Patients would wear the stones, place them in drinking water, or grind them into powders. While completely unscientific, these practices persisted, blending medieval mysticism with Renaissance curiosity. Astrology continued to play a major role in diagnoses. Physicians often carried star charts and consulted horoscopes before performing treatments. Certain procedures were timed according to planetary alignments. If Saturn was in a poor position, for example, it might be deemed unsafe to perform surgery. This led to treatments being delayed, sometimes fatally, until the stars approved. In terms of physical therapy, bizarre mechanical devices were developed to retrain the body. One contraption, known as the trepidation chair, was used for nervous conditions. The patient was strapped into the chair, which then shook violently, believed to reset the nerves and restore mental clarity. Others were rotated in spinning cages or submerged in freezing baths to shock the body back into health. But perhaps the strangest treatments came from the ongoing belief in the doctrine of signatures. This was the idea that God had left clues in nature about how plants and substances should be used. Walnuts, resembling brains, were used to treat head ailments. Liverwort, shaped like a liver, was thought to cure liver problems. This symbolic thinking led to all manner of odd remedies, with little basis in science. Also prominent during this time was the use of bezoars, stone-like concretions formed in animal stomachs. They were thought to be universal antidotes to poison. Wealthy individuals often carried bezoars in ornate containers or ground them into drinks to cleanse the body. Even monarchs like Queen Elizabeth I reportedly believed in their power. And then there was powdered skull. Known as cranium humanum, this was exactly what it sounds like. Dried, ground human skull taken from corpses and sold as medicine. It was used to treat epilepsy and head trauma under the logic that like cures like. The more fresh or noble the source, the more potent the medicine was believed to be. Still, amid these dark and unusual treatments there were advances. Ambroise Paré, a French battlefield surgeon, revolutionized wound care by abandoning the use of boiling oil on gunshot wounds, a barbaric standard of the time. Instead, he used soothing salves, bandages, and observation. His results were so much better that he helped shift the tide of medical opinion. Hospitals began to shift as well. From medieval infirmaries run by monks, they began evolving into secular institutions. Though hygiene remained poor and overcrowding was rampant, the idea of centralized care was taking root. Anatomy theatres continued to educate doctors, and slowly, experimental observation began to replace blind tradition. But even as reason gained ground, the strangeness of medicine remained ever present. And for every step forward, there remained a long shadow of superstition, desperation, and the willingness to believe in the unbelievable. As the 17th and 18th centuries dawned, the Enlightenment swept across Europe, bringing with it a new reverence for science, observation, and rationality. But even in this so-called Age of Reason, bizarre medical practices not only survived, they sometimes evolved into something stranger, more theatrical, and no less unsettling. Let us begin with the concept of electrotherapy. The discovery of electricity opened up new realms of fascination and fear. Some early physicians believed electric shocks could cure ailments ranging from paralysis to melancholia. They would pass currents through the body using rudimentary devices like Leyden jars or friction machines. Patients would twitch, convulse, or scream in pain, yet many swore they felt better afterward. Electricity in their minds was a divine spark, capable of jump-starting the soul as well as the body. Around the same time, the idea of animal magnetism captured imaginations across Europe. It was championed by Franz Mesmer, who believed an invisible magnetic fluid flowed through all living things. Illness, he argued, occurred when this fluid was blocked. His treatments involved passing magnets over the body, or, later, his bare hands, to manipulate this unseen force. He would perform in candlelit salons, with music playing, and patients holding hands around magnetic tubs. People fainted, convulsed, or fell into trances, convinced they were being healed. Though later debunked, Mesmer's practices gave birth to modern hypnotism and the word mesmerize. This period also saw the rise of the traveling surgeon. These were self-proclaimed doctors who toured the countryside, often performing surgeries or extractions in town squares. With little more than a cart of tools and a flair for showmanship, they would pull teeth, lance abscesses, or even amputate limbs for onlookers. They shouted, barked, and boasted, selling snake oils and miracle tonics from their wagons. These events were part medicine, part circus. One popular remedy of the time was blistering. Blistering agents, like Spanish fly or mustard paste, were applied to the skin to provoke large, painful blisters. The theory was that the body would be distracted from the internal illness, and that the act of drawing out toxins through the skin would purify the blood. Some patients endured multiple rounds of blistering across their backs, chests, or even faces. Another strange yet accepted treatment was smoking enemas. Yes, this involved blowing tobacco smoke, literally, into a patient's rectum. It was believed to revive drowning victims, stimulate respiration, and even cure colds. Kits for this procedure were available in some public locations, especially near rivers. The practice fell out of favor only when scientists realized the toxic effects of tobacco. Then came the corpse medicine. While mummy powder was waning, other forms of medicinal cannibalism persisted. Human blood, especially that of young or recently deceased individuals, was believed to have vitality-giving properties. Some patients attended executions specifically to drink fresh blood. Skull moss, scraped from the skulls of buried corpses, was powdered and sold for its supposed healing benefits. Not to be outdone, early obstetric practices also involved strange rituals. It was common to bind pregnant women tightly with cloth during labor to help the baby descend. Forceps, when introduced, were initially kept secret by the Chamberlain family, who used them behind closed curtains. Midwives, too, had their superstitions, spitting on newborns for luck, or placing amulets on laboring mothers to ward off spirits. In hospitals, bed rotation was sometimes used as therapy. Patients were strapped into rotating chairs or beds that spun or tilted them rapidly, meant to cure mental illness by altering the flow of blood to the brain. The experience was disorienting, sometimes nauseating, and rarely effective. And we mustn't forget cupping. Heated glass cups were placed on the skin to create suction. This technique, intended to draw out bad humours, often left large bruises or welts. Wet cupping went further. Cuts were made in the skin before applying the cups to allow blood to flow freely. Though painful and potentially dangerous, it remained popular well into the modern era. The Enlightenment did bring progress. Inoculation against smallpox became more widespread, thanks in part to Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, who introduced the technique to Britain after observing it in the Ottoman Empire. Later, Edward Jenner's development of the smallpox vaccine marked a major triumph of empirical science. But for most people, the day-to-day experience of medicine still relied on rituals, beliefs, and dramatic, often theatrical treatments that would seem absurd or terrifying today. The Enlightenment's quest for knowledge didn't just lead to discovery, it also birthed spectacle. In this age of curiosity, public fascination with the human body transformed the practice of medicine into something resembling performance art. Nowhere was this more apparent than in anatomy theatres. Originally confined to universities, these lecture halls became quasi-public venues where dissections were performed before an audience. The body, usually that of an executed criminal, was dissected slowly over days, with each part carefully studied, often while students and local elites watched from tiered seating. These theatres had the solemnity of cathedrals and the tension of a courtroom, where every cut carried both scientific significance and a morbid allure. Meanwhile, curiosity cabinets, collections of strange preserved specimens, became popular among aristocrats and amateur scientists. Skulls, fetuses in jars, tumours, and animal deformities were displayed like works of art. These early medical museums were not just educational, they were shocking, designed to challenge one's sense of natural order and morality. Pharmaceutical experimentation flourished too. One concoction popular in the 18th century was Daffy's elixir, a patent medicine advertised to cure everything from indigestion to melancholy to worms. It was a mixture of herbs, alcohol, and opiates. Like many patent medicines of the time, it relied on mystery and marketing more than chemistry. Opium, in fact, became the wonder drug of the age. Mixed into laudanum, an alcohol-based tincture, it was used to treat insomnia, coughs, diarrhea, and even teething pain in children. It brought calm, comfort, and widespread addiction. Many prominent figures of the time, including writers and politicians, relied on laudanum for relief, and sometimes for inspiration. In psychiatric medicine, asylum care evolved but remained deeply flawed. While some reformers pushed for humane treatment, others experimented with moral management and bizarre mechanical therapies. One such invention was the tranquilizer chair, a device that restrained the body while blocking vision and muffling sound. It was intended to calm agitated patients, but often caused panic or physical harm. For madness caused by supposed overactivity of the reproductive system, treatments became gendered and disturbing. Women were subjected to clitoridectomies or prescribed enforced. Celibacy. Men might be treated with cold water immersion or penile cauterization. These measures were often justified by physicians with rigid views on morality and sexual behavior. Bathhouses also served therapeutic roles. Hot mineral baths, sulfur soaks, and steam treatments were prescribed for everything from gout to melancholy of the liver. In certain spas, bizarre water-based treatments, like dousing patients with jets from pressurized hoses, were used to stimulate their systems. And still, the four humours lingered, if not always by name, then in the instinct to purge, balance, and control. Vomiting, purging, bleeding, and blistering remained part of medical regimens, even as microscopes revealed a world of cells, tissues, and eventually, germs. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the seeds of modern medicine were being planted, but they were growing in the soil of ancient beliefs, fed by the strange nutrients of superstition, showmanship, and suffering. The bizarre treatments of the Enlightenment era remind us that the journey towards scientific clarity was anything but straightforward. Even in the age of reason, the path to healing remained twisted. By the late Enlightenment period, scientific thought had begun to reshape European medicine more dramatically, but it hadn't yet unseated the strange. If anything, the intellectual boldness of the era gave physicians confidence to pursue ever more creative and questionable treatments in the name of discovery. One of the most prestigious figures of this period was Dr. James Graham, a Scottish physician known for creating the Temple of Health and Hymen in London. It was part medical clinic, part spa, and part theatrical venue. At its centre was the celestial bed, a grand, electrified contraption adorned with perfumes, musical harmonies, and even live doves. Graham claimed it could cure infertility and improve virility. Clients, including aristocrats, paid enormous sums to lie beneath twinkling lights, while currents of static electricity were passed through their bodies. It was part show, part therapy, and deeply emblematic of the blurred lines between performance and medicine. At the same time, one of the Enlightenment's darker chapters emerged in the form of resurrectionists. These were grave robbers who unearthed recently buried corpses to sell them to medical schools for dissection. Because acquiring cadavers legally was nearly impossible, students and professors alike turned a blind eye to the trade. In Edinburgh, the infamous Burke and Hare took this further by committing murder to supply bodies to anatomists, sparking public outrage and a re-evaluation of medical ethics. Other practices that seemed perfectly normal at the time are jarring in hindsight. One such remedy was the application of pigeon carcasses to the soles of a sick person's feet. This was believed to draw out fevers. In other cases, cats were used to warm the abdomen of patients suffering from cramps or chills. The warmth and softness were comforting, but the belief in the animal's healing essence extended far beyond simple comfort. Public hospitals during this time, while improving, were still harsh environments. Beds were often shared between multiple patients, and infections ran rampant. Amputation was the treatment of choice for infected limbs, and though surgical tools improved, there was still no anesthesia. Surgeons prided themselves on speed. A good surgeon could remove a leg in under 2 minutes. Mortality rates were high, and audiences sometimes cheered during successful procedures. Dental practices also grew in notoriety during this time. False teeth were becoming fashionable, but the best dentures were made from real human teeth, often pulled from corpses or sold by the poor. These Waterloo teeth, named after the battlefield where they were collected en masse, were cleaned and inserted into ivory plates for the wealthy. Meanwhile, phrenology took hold of the public imagination. This was the belief that the shape and contours of one's skull could reveal personality traits, intelligence, and even moral character. Phrenologists created detailed skull maps, dividing the brain into regions responsible for traits like combativeness, benevolence, or amativeness. Though based on flawed logic, phrenology was taken seriously by many and even used to justify social hierarchies and criminal profiling. Enemas remained a daily ritual among the European elite, especially in France. Some noblemen reportedly had up to 4 per day, delivered by specially trained servants using silver syringes. They believed it preserved youth, clarity, and strength. Aromatic enemas containing lavender, honey, or even wine were popular, further blurring the line between indulgence and medicine. In colonial outposts, bizarre hybrid treatments evolved, melding European methods with local beliefs. In the Caribbean, it was common to combine bleeding techniques with native herbal rituals. In India, British officers sometimes subjected themselves to local snakebite treatments that included charms and ritual dances, alongside rudimentary incisions and poultices. In some cases, these blended systems offered real relief. In others, they simply showcased the desperation and cultural confusion of medicine under empire. And through it all, the concept of vital energy persisted, whether it was electrical, magnetic, spiritual, or elemental. Doctors and charlatans alike marketed potions, powders, and procedures that promised to restore this invisible life force. It was a concept as old as humors and as enduring as the placebo effect. The Enlightenment expanded humanity's understanding of anatomy, disease, and bodily function. But it also revealed just how far people would go, how much pain they would endure, and how much belief they would invest in the search for health. Tomorrow's science was born in the laboratories of the bold and the bedside of the bizarre. The 19th century was a paradoxical time in medicine. On one hand, it ushered in extraordinary scientific advances, the discovery of germs, anesthesia, and the development of antiseptic techniques. On the other, it remained steeped in mysticism, moral rigidity, and deeply unusual treatments, especially during the long reign of Queen Victoria. Let us begin with anesthesia. The introduction of ether and chloroform in the 1840s revolutionized surgery, finally allowing for pain-free procedures. But these early anesthetics were unpredictable and dangerous. Physicians often administered them by trial and error, using cloths soaked with chemicals and guessing dosages based on the patient's weight or guesswork. Some patients never woke up. Yet for all its danger, this breakthrough marked a turning point, making complex surgeries more humane and accessible. Still, pain management remained experimental. Cocaine was introduced as a local anesthetic and quickly found favor, not just in surgery, but in every day. Remedies. It was marketed for toothaches, fatigue, and even shyness. Sigmund Freud praised its stimulating effects, while companies like Park Davis promoted it as a tonic for the mind. The dangers of addiction were not yet fully understood. Victorian society was obsessed with morality and control, and this extended into medicine. Masturbation, for instance, was considered a serious medical problem. Physicians believed it led to insanity, blindness, and death. Treatments included enforced abstinence, chastity belts, and, in extreme cases, circumcision or clitoridectomy. Cornflakes and graham crackers were even invented as bland foods intended to suppress lust. Women's health was particularly misunderstood and often mistreated. Hysteria remained a catch-all diagnosis for symptoms ranging from anxiety and insomnia to headaches and sexual desire. One common treatment was manual stimulation by doctors, believed to relieve emotional tension. This led to the invention of the first electromechanical vibrators, not for pleasure, but as a time-saving device for weary physicians. At the same time, the sanitarium movement flourished. These were health resorts promoting fresh air, rest, and structured routines. Some were genuinely beneficial. Others promoted bizarre regimens, cold water dousing, meatless diets, electric baths, and even the ingestion of radioactive water. Radium, discovered in 1898, was marketed as a health tonic. Products like Radithor, a radium-laced drink, were sold as energy boosters. One wealthy industrialist, Eben Byers, drank so much Radithor that his bones disintegrated and his jaw fell off. He died a painful death, becoming a poster child for the dangers of pseudoscience. The Victorians were also captivated by body imagery. Corsets were worn tightly to create hourglass figures, often displacing organs and causing fainting, digestive issues, and permanent deformities. Doctors rarely condemned the practice. Instead, they treated its symptoms with laxatives, purgatives, and tonics. Elsewhere, the rise of homeopathy created a curious blend of science and pseudoscience. Developed by Samuel Hahnemann, homeopathy was based on the principle of like cures like. Substances that cause symptoms in healthy people were diluted repeatedly until almost no trace remained. These remedies were then used to treat similar symptoms. Despite lacking scientific backing, homeopathy spread rapidly and remains popular in some circles, even today. The medical theatre continued in public institutions. Hospitals showcased new technologies like X-rays, which were discovered in 1895. People lined up to see their bones, unaware of the radiation exposure. Early radiologists often developed burns or cancer from prolonged use, before protective gear was standard. The Victorian fascination with death also shaped medicine. Mourning customs were elaborate, and people regularly took post-mortem photographs of the deceased. Some believed that staring into the eyes of a corpse could transmit disease, or that spirits lingered around the dying. Mediums and spiritualists offered seances to contact the dead, while death masks were taken for scientific or artistic study. Meanwhile, phrenology, though discredited, lingered on in parlors and classrooms. Human zoos and eugenics emerged under the guise of scientific progress, showcasing just how easily medicine could be distorted to serve ideology. For all its contradictions, the Victorian age laid foundations for modern medical ethics and clinical practice. Yet, it also reminds us how medicine, like any human endeavor, can veer into the strange when guided by cultural bias, commercialism, and unquestioned belief. As the Victorian age reached its peak, the thirst for scientific discovery grew insatiable, but so did the Victorian tendency toward ritual, rigidity, and social control. The bizarre remained a constant companion of the emerging modern medical world. One area of strange and often cruel intervention was psychiatry. The Victorian asylum was a complex institution, part prison, part hospital, part moral laboratory. Treatments for mental illness ranged from humane to horrifying. Hydrotherapy was one of the most common approaches. Patients were bathed in hot or cold water, wrapped in wet sheets, or doused in freezing buckets. These treatments were meant to shock patients out of mania or calm them into submission. Then there were rotating chairs, mechanical seats that spun patients at high speed, believed to redistribute blood flow and balance the mind. Isolation cells were also standard, as were sensory deprivation masks and straitjackets. Though the intentions behind these practices sometimes stemmed from a desire to help, the outcomes were often dehumanizing. The infamous rest cure became a prescribed answer for women suffering from depression or anxiety. Popularized by physician Silas Weir Mitchell, it involved complete bed rest, forced feeding, no reading, no writing, and no social interaction. This suffocating regimen was immortalized in Charlotte Perkins Gilman's short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, a chilling critique of the way medicine could erase rather than heal. Meanwhile, medical inventions exploded into popularity. Blood tonics, hair restorers, and nerve pills were sold in abundance, often laced with alcohol, cocaine, or opium. Vin Mariani, a popular wine tonic, was laced with coca and became a favorite of Queen Victoria and Pope Leo XIII. These products claimed to relieve fatigue, depression, and nervousness, but often led to dependence and decline. In the realm of surgery, antiseptic methods were introduced by Joseph Lister in the 1860s, dramatically reducing infection and post-operative deaths. He used carbolic acid to sterilize tools and wounds. At first, his methods were met with skepticism, but as survival rates soared, antiseptics revolutionized surgical standards. Still, many surgeons resisted change, leading to a strange contrast in hospitals, where one operating room might be pristine and sterile, and another still riddled with infection and blood-stained aprons. Dental surgery advanced as well, but remained painful and dramatic. Dentists used foot-powered drills to grind into teeth, loud, slow, and agonizing. Nitrous oxide, laughing gas, and ether were introduced to dull the pain, but proper dosage was still uncertain. Many patients passed out or vomited. Others became hysterical. Some dentists used chloroform in confined rooms with no ventilation, exposing themselves and their patients to lethal fumes. Even as germ theory gained traction, miasma theory, the belief that disease was spread through bad air, remained stubbornly popular. Entire neighborhoods were redesigned to improve airflow, and hospitals burned herbs or sulfur to purify the air. Meanwhile, public health reformers like Florence Nightingale pushed for cleanliness, proper ventilation, and light in hospitals, bringing about real, measurable improvements. One especially unusual Victorian practice involved using live animals in medicine. Leech therapy made a resurgence, and maggots were used to clean out necrotic tissue in wounds, a technique that, oddly, has returned in modern wound care with proper hygiene. But in the 19th century, it was a last resort in battlefield hospitals and impoverished clinics. Electricity, which once shocked Enlightenment-era minds, returned with a Victorian flourish. Electrotherapy devices were marketed for everything from arthritis to infertility. Some contraptions were worn like corsets or applied like massage rollers. Traveling salesmen demonstrated devices at public fairs, offering free shocks to the curious. For some ailments, these jolts may have provided temporary relief. For others, they were little more than theatrics with a tingle. Quackery, too, flourished in the shadows of legitimate science. Traveling healers performed miracle cures, exorcisms, or bone setting in town squares. The Victorians, curious and cautious, couldn't always tell where real medicine ended and fantasy began. Some potions bore elaborate, Latin-engraved labels to inspire confidence. Others leaned on celebrity endorsements or religious claims. All tapped into the era's profound desire to control health in a rapidly changing world. This was the age of contradiction, where spiritualists read the stars while pathologists charted bacteria, and where belief in progress existed right beside unshakable myths. The Victorian legacy in medicine is one of progress, but also of pomp, fear, and astonishingly strange solutions to the timeless problem of pain. As the Victorian century moved deeper into its second half, the influence of empire, industry, and invention converged to create one of the most medically experimental and bizarre periods in human history. The desire to solve every human ailment, combined with a rising middle class hungry for comfort, gave rise to a marketplace flooded with untested products, unusual techniques, and global remedies drawn from the farthest reaches of colonial territory. Let's begin with the explosion of bottled cures and patent medicines. In an age before regulation, manufacturers could, and did, claim almost anything. A simple bottle of syrup might promise to cure coughs, baldness, anemia, cancer, indigestion, melancholy, and aging. Ingredients were rarely disclosed, but many concoctions relied on a familiar blend: alcohol, opium, cocaine, morphine, or chloroform. These ingredients offered real, temporary relief, making users swear by their efficacy while masking symptoms and cultivating dependence. Among the most popular of these was Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, aimed at female complaints. Marketed as a cure for menstrual pain, mood swings, and nervous weakness, it was little more than a blend of herbs and alcohol. Still, it became a household name, complete with endorsements from grateful mothers and wives across Britain and America. In truth, it often just got them tipsy enough to forget their suffering. Meanwhile, the emergence of the health elixir craze swept up the Victorian imagination. People were drinking everything from cod liver oil to crushed pearls to dissolved gold. Gold-infused tonics were advertised as a cure for everything from impotence to indigestion. So too was silver, sold as colloidal solutions that promised internal cleansing and immunity boosts. Little did users know that excessive silver intake could lead to argyria, a condition that turned the skin a permanent blue-grey hue. The Victorians also believed deeply in the power of physical stimuli to realign the body. Massage therapy became professionalized, especially for the hysterical woman. Electric belts were sold to men to enhance virility or cure back pain. These belts delivered mild shocks, marketed as a way to revitalize the nervous system, stimulate the organs, and increase masculine vigor. Some belts had adjustable voltage. Others offered attachments for special stimulation. And then came the enema empire. Enemas had been used for centuries, but in Victorian society, they became nearly ritualistic, especially among the upper classes. A morning cleanse with warm water, coffee, or even tobacco smoke was seen as essential to vitality. Elaborate enema kits, made of silver, glass, or porcelain, were kept in personal washrooms. Some families had live-in servants trained in their use. It was not unusual for chronic patients to receive daily enemas, often with herbal infusions, milk, or salt water. The obsession with internal cleanliness reflected deeper fears of urban living and moral decay. In the realm of reproductive medicine, treatments grew stranger still. Infertility was a source of great social shame, and many turned to fringe cures. One such method involved injecting sperm from anonymous donors directly into the uterus, years before the concept of sperm banks became mainstream. Animal testicle extracts, particularly from bulls or rams, were also injected as a means to restore virility. These experiments were often painful, ineffective, and unsanitary, but widely promoted. Women, meanwhile, were subjected to uterine fumigation, exposing the cervix to medicinal smoke or steam to treat barrenness. Other treatments involved douching with vinegar, salt water, or herbal decoctions. Some of these might have helped in limited ways, but most were based on superstition and guesswork. Another curious phenomenon was the therapeutic use of corsets, not just as fashion, but as a medical necessity. Physicians prescribed tightly laced corsets for spinal support, organ repositioning, and even mental calm. Some corsets were fitted with steel rods or leather braces and worn 24 hours a day. They often caused fainting, shortness of breath, and even prolapsed organs. But Victorian society continued to prize their supposed health benefits. The connection between medicine and empire cannot be overlooked. British colonies brought with them a new array of botanicals: quinine for malaria, cannabis for pain, and coca leaves for fatigue. Colonists wrote home about local healing rituals, leading to the exoticization of Eastern and indigenous medicine. Remedies from India, Africa, and the Caribbean were often rebranded, bottled, and sold in London pharmacies, stripped of context but rich in mystery. One popular example was Indian hemp, used to relieve neuralgia, spasms, and insomnia. Physicians prescribed it for women experiencing nervous disorders, unaware that it was, in essence, medicinal cannabis. Meanwhile, Ayurvedic and Chinese treatments were appropriated and repackaged, often without understanding the philosophies that shaped them. Back home, the rise of phrenology, spiritualism, and mesmerism continued to blur the lines between science and pseudoscience. Some medical men hosted seances or spirit readings as therapy for grief or depression. Others used mesmerism, hypnosis, to treat sexual, repression, compulsions, or stuttering. Although these practices were ridiculed by mainstream science, they attracted tens of thousands of believers and clients. And amid all this complexity, one medical revelation began to take root that would change the world: germ theory. Championed by scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, it finally explained how disease was spread, not by miasmas or bad behavior, but by invisible organisms. Hand washing, sterilization, and antiseptic technique began saving lives. Yet in a bizarre twist, many hospitals still clung to old practices. Doctors would examine corpses, then attend childbirth without washing their hands, leading to deadly infections like puerperal fever. It was an age of dualities, progress and peril, invention and indulgence. The Victorians had unlocked powerful truths about the body, yet they wrapped those truths in a thick shroud of social anxieties, magical thinking, and aggressive commercialism. For every step toward modernity, they took a step into the strange. Medicine, like the age itself, was magnificent and mad. As the 20th century opened, medicine found itself at a crossroads. The Victorian world of corsets and cocaine tonics was giving way to the laboratory age, one of microscopes, sterilized instruments, and the birth of modern hospitals. Yet, even amid real scientific advancement, strange and unsettling practices still held sway. The first decades of the century were marked by optimism, fueled by breakthroughs in surgery, vaccines, and public health. But they were also a time of bold experimentation, when doctors, newly confident in their science, tried treatments that were not only untested, but often unethical, even brutal. Consider the use of lobotomies. Developed in the 1930s by Portuguese neurologist Antonio Egas Moniz, the procedure involves severing connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex. It was believed to alleviate symptoms of severe mental illness, particularly schizophrenia and manic depression. The procedure gained rapid popularity, especially in the United States, where it was championed by neurologist Walter Freeman. Freeman's ice pick lobotomy became infamous. He used a slender metal tool inserted through the eye socket, hammering it into the brain and sweeping it side to side to disrupt neural pathways. All done without anesthesia. Thousands underwent the procedure, from institutionalized patients to troubled housewives and rebellious children. While some patients became more docile, many lost speech, cognition, or the ability to care for themselves. Others died on the table. Still, lobotomies continued well into the 1950s before finally falling out of favor. At the same time, sterilization was being applied on a large scale, not for medical necessity, but as part of the eugenics movement. Promoted by scientists and governments in both Europe and the United States, eugenics sought to improve the human race by controlling reproduction. Those deemed unfit, including the mentally ill, the poor, the disabled, and racial minorities, were forcibly sterilized. In the US alone, tens of thousands were affected under state-sanctioned programs. Some victims never even knew what had been done to them. The early 20th century also saw a continued obsession with body image. Tapeworm diet pills were sold to women who wanted to stay slim. The pills promised to introduce a tapeworm into the digestive tract, which would consume excess food and led to weight loss. In reality, the risks were immense. Tapeworms can grow over 20 feet long, cause malnutrition, intestinal blockages, and even death. Other weight loss fads included rubberized sweatsuits, electric belts, and soap-based fat reducers. One company sold obesity soap, claiming that rubbing it on the body during a bath would dissolve fat beneath the skin. In dentistry, Novocaine was introduced, making tooth extraction more humane, but many patients still faced crude treatment. Dentists drilled with foot-powered machines, sterilized tools inconsistently, and pulled teeth without fully understanding oral infections. Toothworm theories persisted in rural areas, where herbalists and folk dentists offered cures involving garlic cloves, burning wires, or even bee stings. World War I brought medical innovation out of necessity. Doctors developed better wound care techniques, antiseptics, and prosthetics. Yet it also gave rise to horrors. Experimental surgeries were performed on the battlefield. Amputations were rushed. Soldiers with shell shock, an early term for PTSD, were sometimes subjected to electric shocks or isolation instead of therapy. Psychiatry remained both promising and punishing. Hydrotherapy, still in use, was used to treat everything from depression to delusions. Patients were submerged in icy water or wrapped in cold sheets for hours. In some institutions, patients were given fever therapy, in which they were deliberately infected with malaria to induce high fevers thought to combat neurosyphilis. Drug experimentation grew more sophisticated and more dangerous. Heroin, originally developed by Bayer as a non-addictive alternative to morphine, was marketed as a cough suppressant and painkiller before being banned. Cocaine was still used in nasal sprays and local anesthetics. Barbiturates became widely prescribed for sleep disorders and anxiety, launching a new era of dependency and overdose risk. Strange medical marketing also flourished. Radioactive tonics, left over from Victorian trends, were still sold in some pharmacies. Products like Radithor claimed to restore energy and virility. One famous victim, Eben Byers, drank bottle after bottle, eventually developing severe radiation poisoning. His bones decayed, his jaw fell apart, and he died a gruesome death, prompting new regulations on radium use. There were lighter oddities too. Violet ray machines were sold for home use, promising to cure headaches, wrinkles, and sexual dysfunction with mild electric pulses. Devices like the Battle Creek vibratory chair promised to shake patients into better health. Colon cleansers, hair restorers, and lung exercisers filled mail-order catalogues, each boasting pseudoscientific claims backed by actors in white coats. Yet alongside all of this, real medicine was quietly building momentum. The first antibiotics were on the horizon. Surgical hygiene became standard. Blood typing, transfusions, and better diagnostics transformed emergency care. Still, the medical world remained a tangled landscape, where the rational and the ridiculous coexisted in uneasy harmony. In this era of white-tiled clinics and chrome-plated devices, the old superstitions had not fully vanished. They had simply changed form, wearing the polished face of science, while whispering old promises in a new voice. As the first half of the 20th century unfolded, the world found itself gripped by war, industrialization, and profound social transformation, and medicine reflected all of it. The field surged with new technologies and theories. Yet those same breakthroughs often unleashed practices as dangerous as the diseases they aimed to treat. For every cure, there seemed to be a controversy. For every innovation, a shadow. Let us begin with electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, introduced in the 1930s and 40s as a treatment for severe mental illness. Originally seen as a breakthrough, it involved passing electric currents through the brain to induce controlled seizures. The idea was that the convulsions could reset neural pathways, alleviating symptoms of depression, mania, and schizophrenia. And in some cases, it worked, especially with patients suffering from catatonia or deep melancholia. But in practice, ECT became notorious. Administered without anesthesia in its early years, patients would often suffer fractured bones, memory loss, and trauma from the procedure. Hospitals overused it, applying it not just to the severely ill, but to anyone deemed difficult or non-compliant. Children, the elderly, and housewives with postpartum depression were shocked into submission. What began as a hopeful technique became a symbol of psychiatric cruelty. It would take decades and refinement through modern anesthesia and safety protocols before ECT found a legitimate, humane role in psychiatric care. Meanwhile, another bizarre and disturbing treatment gained popularity: insulin coma therapy. Introduced by Austrian physician Manfred Sackel in the 1930s, this method involved administering large doses of insulin to induce hypoglycemic comas in schizophrenic patients. The rationale was vague. It was thought that by rebooting the brain through repeated metabolic shock, psychosis might be relieved. Sessions could last weeks, even months. Patients were injected daily, fell into comas, and were later revived with glucose. The process was dangerous, exhausting, and rarely effective. Some patients suffered brain damage, seizures, or died. Yet it spread rapidly through psychiatric hospitals, especially in Europe and North America. The visual of unconscious patients laid out like factory rows became emblematic of a medical culture more focused on control than cure. Elsewhere, the obsession with rejuvenation reached new heights and odd new frontiers. In the 1920s, Russian surgeon Serge Voronov made headlines with his experiments in glandular transplants. He believed that aging and sexual decline were caused by a loss of vital glandular energy. His solution? Implant thin slices of monkey testicles into aging men. These surgeries, often performed on wealthy patients, were marketed as a way to regain youth, energy, and virility. Initially hailed as a genius, Voronov gained international fame. Even prominent men underwent the procedure. But the results were short-lived, and the scientific community soon rejected his theories. Still, his work inspired a host of similar rejuvenation attempts, from hormone injections to bizarre transplants, many of which danced on the edge of ethics. This was also the golden age of medical fads built around radiology. After X-rays were discovered in the late 19th century, their application spread far and wide, often without safety precautions. Shoe stores used X-ray machines to show how well shoes fit. Children and pregnant women were exposed without concern. Doctors X-rayed everything from lungs to hairlines to the stomach, sometimes just for spectacle. Perhaps even more peculiar was the use of radioactive compounds in everyday health products. Toothpaste with thorium, facial creams with radon, water bottles lined with uranium ore. These items were sold under the premise of vital energy, promising to refresh skin, stimulate circulation, and even balance moods. One company sold a radium-laced chocolate bar. Another offered a suppository lined with radium-infused gauze. The irony is staggering. In the pursuit of health, many poisoned themselves slowly, unaware of radiation's long-term effects. Even birth control and reproductive health carried their share of bizarre interventions. Before the widespread availability of contraceptives, women turned to all manner of strange devices and potions. Douches with vinegar or Lysol were common, dangerous, ineffective, and often painful. Herbal pessaries, inserted into the cervix to block sperm, included ingredients like crocodile dung or cocoa butter mixed with mercury. For men, questionable aphrodisiacs and virility boosters included powdered rhino horn, arsenic, and desiccated animal glands. One particularly popular product promised electrosexual health through wearable devices that sent mild shocks to the groin. Another offered bull testicle extract in a syrupy tonic, sold with testimonials of revived masculinity. In rural communities and among working-class families, folk medicine endured in parallel. Old world traditions remained alive: mustard plasters for chest infections, goose fat for pneumonia, turpentine on sugar for cough. Some remedies offered relief. Others led to burns, infections, or poisoning. In institutions and hospitals, cleanliness began improving, but not without resistance. Nurses and doctors were often overworked, undertrained, and skeptical of new protocols. The push for hand washing, sterile tools, and rubber gloves met with cultural inertia. Many doctors still perform surgery in bloodied coats, worn like a badge of honor, not a hygiene hazard. Meanwhile, psychosomatic illnesses, real conditions driven by stress or trauma, were misunderstood and mistreated. Nervous women were still given sedatives or sent to sanatoriums. Soldiers returning from war with trauma were accused of cowardice or malingering. The medical world lacked language and compassion for what we now understand as anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Still, the century marched on. Medical schools improved. Public health campaigns began educating communities about hygiene, nutrition, and vaccination. But the ghosts of earlier practices, some experimental, some exploitative, lingered in hospital wings and doctors' offices. This was a century in metamorphosis. Science had cracked open the cell, the microbe, and the organ system. Yet, in its rush forward, medicine often treated the body like a battlefield, curing with violence, controlling with chemicals, and silencing with electricity. The strangest treatments of the 20th century didn't come from ignorance. They came from ambition, unchecked and unrefined. And so the scalpel of progress cut both ways. As the mid-20th century approached, medicine stood on a gleaming, sanitized threshold. Hospitals gleamed with white tile and steel. Nurses in pressed uniforms moved efficiently between wards. And new technologies hummed in sterile rooms. The image of medicine had changed. But behind the polished veneer, strange and often disturbing practices continued, shaped by ideology, experimentation, and the enduring human fascination with the body. Take, for example, the rise of psychosurgery beyond the lobotomy. In Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, neurosurgeons performed targeted brain operations on political dissidents, labeling them mentally ill. The thin boundary between psychiatry and authoritarian control led to thousands being institutionalized not for sickness, but for dissent. Treatment was often secondary to punishment. In America, psychological manipulation entered new territory through behavioral modification. Aversion therapy became popular for a range of behaviors deemed undesirable, including alcoholism, smoking, and homosexuality. Some of these treatments involved electric shocks, nausea-inducing drugs, or even chemically induced vomiting paired with targeted images or sounds. The goal was to create a negative association so powerful it would extinguish the behavior. For gay individuals, aversion therapy became a form of state-sanctioned cruelty. Patients were often subjected to electroshock or forced injections of apomorphine, which caused severe nausea, all while being shown erotic imagery. These methods were carried out with the full backing of the medical establishment and often left patients traumatized, confused, and deeply scarred. Meanwhile, in the name of better parenting and childhood development, psychiatrists promoted extreme ideas. John B. Watson, the father of behaviorism, advised against hugging children or showing affection. He believed emotional displays were primitive and counterproductive. Parents were told to avoid coddling, to sleep train infants with rigid schedules, and to let babies cry for their own good. Decades later, this cold approach would be questioned, even condemned, but for years it shaped an entire generation's relationship with touch and tenderness. On another front, experimentation with sensory deprivation captured attention. Researchers like John C. Lilly developed flotation tanks, where subjects lay in salt water in total darkness and silence. While the tanks would later be repurposed for relaxation and therapy, in the early stages, they were used to study hallucinations, cognition, and isolation-induced anxiety. Lilly also administered high doses of LSD in combination with these sessions, pushing the boundaries of consciousness in search of inner space. LSD itself became a tool for psychiatry and control. In the 1950s and 60s, intelligence agencies such as the CIA conducted covert experiments under the now infamous MKUltra program. Unwitting citizens, soldiers, and prisoners were given hallucinogens, hypnotics, and stimulants without their knowledge. The goal was mind control, behavior alteration, and truth extraction. The results were often terrifying: psychosis, suicide, mental breakdowns. The public would not learn the full extent of these programs for decades. Back in the clinical sphere, birth and maternity were also shaped by strange trends. The twilight sleep method, popular in the early to mid-20th century, involved giving laboring women a cocktail of morphine and scopolamine. The result was a semi-conscious state in which the woman had no memory of labor, but often experienced disorientation, hallucinations, or violence. Women were strapped to beds to prevent injury during thrashing. The goal was pain-free delivery. The reality, often, was trauma. Simultaneously, the caesarean section rate soared. Doctors, increasingly in control of birth, opted for surgical delivery more readily. Forceps were still used, liberally, sometimes forcefully, leading to injury for both mother and child. Natural birthing positions were discouraged. Women were confined to beds, tilted with their feet in stirrups, while a masked team delivered the child. Birth had become a procedure, not an event. In schools and clinics, medical films became a standard tool for education. But many were bizarre or alarmist in nature. Hygiene films warned about invisible germs using creepy animations. Others attempted to explain puberty or venereal disease using stiff clinical language and outdated gender roles. One film advised teenage girls to avoid holding hands for too long, lest they confuse friendship with desire. And even amid advances in vaccinations, nutrition, and antibiotics, some treatments retained their strange character. Diabetics used glass syringes, they boiled themselves. Asthma patients inhaled fumes from burning herbs in tin pipes. Children with developmental disabilities were sometimes subjected to salt rub-downs or freezing cold showers to stimulate cognition. By the 1950s, penicillin and the polio vaccine had changed the face of public health. Yet for all its progress, mid-century medicine was still haunted by older impulses: control, silence, conformity. The body, increasingly seen as a system to be regulated, became the site of experimentation, compliance, and sometimes suppression. Medicine had reached a pivotal turning point. The white coat replaced the top hat. The operating theatre became a laboratory, and the physician assumed the air of the scientist. But the strangeness persisted, disguised as clinical efficiency, or justified by data, or simply accepted because it was said to work. In this world, the bizarre wore a stethoscope. As the world marched through the middle of the 20th century, one thing became clear. Medicine had split into two faces. One was rational, data-driven, and technological. The other was psychological, cultural, and steeped in the lingering shadows of fear, hope, and control. And in the space between, bizarre practices not only survived, they evolved. Perhaps nowhere was this more evident than in cancer treatment. While radiation therapy and chemotherapy emerged as groundbreaking innovations, early methods often inflicted nearly as much harm as the disease itself. Radiation machines of the 1940s and 50s were enormous, poorly shielded, and frequently overused. Patients were sometimes burned, scarred, or left permanently weakened by the treatments. Doses were determined by trial and error, and protective standards were minimal, and yet, to many, the glowing X-ray machine or cobalt cannon was a symbol of modern marvel, despite its invisible toll. Equally curious was the rise of radioactive diagnostics. Doctors injected patients with mildly radioactive tracers to study organ function, especially in the thyroid. While these procedures became essential tools, early attempts lacked precision. Patients were sometimes exposed to radiation levels that would never be allowed today, simply because the risks weren't yet understood. In dermatology, bizarre remedies continued to flourish. Acne sufferers were treated with X-rays to dry the skin. Others underwent ultraviolet or infrared light exposure with no eye protection. Fungal infections were treated with topical mercury or arsenic-based creams. Psoriasis patients were dipped into tar baths or wrapped in cellophane like human sandwiches, believed to sweat out impurities. And still, the commercial market flourished with promises. Electric scalp massages for hair regrowth, belts that vibrated the stomach to remove fat, pills containing thyroid extract to boost metabolism, tapes sold to reshape the nose, creams that claimed to grow breasts or eliminate freckles. Everything was available for the right price, and nothing needed proof. In rural America and isolated parts of Europe, folk medicine still thrived. Cures involved onion poultices made of mashed earthworms, or prayers whispered into boiling water. Some used dowsing rods to find disease hotspots in the home. Others treated colic with spiderweb tea or rubbed garlic on infants' feet to lower fevers. Though these treatments often had no scientific merit, they offered comfort, and sometimes that was enough. Back in the city, psychosomatic disorders began receiving more serious attention, but not always more humane treatment. Conversion disorder, formerly known as hysteria, was diagnosed in women presenting with paralysis, seizures, or blindness with no physical cause. Treatments ranged from psychotherapy to institutionalization. In some cases, doctors experimented with hypnosis, sodium pentothal, so-called truth serum, or sensory immersion. The mind was still a mystery, and many practitioners approached it like alchemists, groping in the dark with tools both primitive and poetic. Medical advertisements also entered the golden age. Magazines, newspapers, and radio shows promoted remedies with dazzling promises: instant energy, easy sleep, sexual confidence, and emotional calm. Tranquilizers like Miltown and later Valium became household names, offered to anxious housewives, stressed executives, and restless children alike. A calm family was a marketable one, and pharmaceutical companies were quick to capitalize. Then came plastic surgery, moving from battlefield necessity to beauty industry staple. After World War II, surgeons who had reconstructed faces torn by shrapnel or flame began offering nose jobs, facelifts, and breast augmentations to civilians. What began in the recovery ward slowly became a cultural phenomenon. By the 1950s, the idea of fixing one's appearance had entered the mainstream. Magazines ran ads for corrective operations on ears, chins, and even feet. It was no longer just about health, it was about perfection. Public health campaigns also took strange turns. In the name of cleanliness, schools encouraged students to bathe daily with antibacterial soap, brush their teeth with fluoride paste, and avoid sharing drinking fountains. Posters warned against germ carriers, showing cartoon microbes lurking on doorknobs, food, and fingers. Though well-meaning, some campaigns verged on paranoia, seeding the idea that cleanliness was a form of moral virtue. As mental health slowly shed its stigma, new forms of therapy appeared: group analysis, encounter sessions, art therapy. Some helped, others became cultish. One practice, known as primal scream therapy, encouraged patients to relive birth trauma by screaming loudly, often for hours. Others participated in rebirthing rituals, or took part in experimental role play to confront trauma. The boundaries between therapy and theatre grew increasingly thin. And all the while, medicine moved inexorably toward a new frontier: the computerized, digitized, data-driven world of modern healthcare. But the path had been long, winding, and strange. What persisted through it all was not just the desire to heal, but the need to believe. Whether in electric belts, radioactive elixirs, lobotomies, or lavender poultices, people sought reassurance that their bodies could be restored, their suffering understood. And medicine, in all its weird wonder, tried, sometimes wisely, sometimes wildly. This was the final breath of an era before medicine fully turned clinical, codified, and cold, when a doctor's office might still hold a little mystery, when the line between healer and magician had not quite disappeared. As the 20th century entered its final decades, medicine took on a new face: sleek, digital, and increasingly global. Hospitals were filled with beeping monitors, CT scanners, and surgical robots. Pills were tiny marvels, each designed for precision. Yet despite these triumphs of modern science, bizarre and unconventional treatments didn't vanish. In fact, some evolved into industries of their own. Let us begin with the explosion of the wellness movement. By the 1970s and 80s, dissatisfaction with cold, clinical medicine led many to seek warmth, balance, and natural alternatives. Yoga, herbal remedies, and meditation entered the mainstream, but so too did a wave of questionable treatments marketed under the banner of holistic health. Homeopathy surged in popularity, despite its principles having been dismissed by most of the scientific community. Still, millions swore by the diluted tinctures and sugar pills, feeling better simply for having done something gentle to their bodies. At the fringes, things grew stranger still. Ear candling, the act of placing a hollow candle in the ear and lighting it to draw out wax and toxins, gained traction. It was not only ineffective, but often dangerous, resulting in burns and ear injuries. Yet it appealed to those disillusioned by sterile doctors' offices and mysterious prescriptions. Crystal healing also surged in popularity. Practitioners claimed that specific stones resonated with bodily energies and could realign chakras or restore emotional harmony. Clinics sprang up where patients lay on tables, while quartz, amethyst, and obsidian were placed on their foreheads, hearts, or spines. Though lacking any empirical support, crystal therapy offered comfort through ritual, touch, and symbolism. Meanwhile, chelation therapy began to be used well beyond its intended purpose. Originally developed to treat heavy metal poisoning, some practitioners began promoting chelation as a cure-all for heart disease, autism, and even aging. Patients underwent intravenous infusions of chemicals meant to cleanse the blood. In some cases, it helped. In others, it led to kidney damage or dangerously low calcium levels. Yet clinics offering these treatments flourished, especially in affluent areas where wellness was synonymous with status. Perhaps most curious was the rise of colon cleansing as a trend. Based on the discredited theory of auto-intoxication, the idea that waste materials in the colon can poison the body, colonic hydrotherapy became fashionable. Practitioners flushed gallons of water into the intestines to detoxify the body. Some added coffee, ozone, or herbal extracts. Though there was little medical benefit, clients often reported a feeling of lightness or euphoria, likely from endorphin release or the sheer novelty of the experience. During this same period, magnet therapy gained followers. Belts, bracelets, and mattress pads embedded with magnets were marketed as pain relief. Tools. The belief was that magnetic fields could influence blood flow or energy fields in the body. While harmless in most cases, these devices often cost hundreds of dollars, backed by little more than anecdotal testimony and pseudo-scientific jargon. Even dentistry had its share of strangeness. In the 1980s and 90s, a controversial belief spread that amalgam dental fillings, which contained mercury, were the cause of multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue syndrome, and a host of mysterious ailments. Some dentists began removing fillings en masse and replacing them with alternative materials, despite the lack of scientific consensus. Entire practices were built on mercury detox, blending traditional dentistry with alternative medicine. The pharmaceutical industry also played a role in shaping bizarre medical culture. Drugs were aggressively marketed, sometimes for off-label uses. Tranquilizers, antidepressants, and painkillers flooded the market, and with them came dependency, side effects, and confusion. At the same time, brain supplements filled store shelves, claiming to boost memory, clarity, and IQ. Most were unregulated, and many were ineffective, but they spoke to a desire for control, improvement, and mental mastery. In mental health, rebirthing therapy caused controversy. It involved wrapping patients tightly in blankets, mimicking birth, and encouraging them to struggle out as a form of catharsis. Tragic incidents, including the suffocation death of a child, forced many jurisdictions to ban the practice, but it persisted underground. Elsewhere, therapeutic touch was practiced by nurses who claimed to manipulate energy fields without physical contact. Skeptics derided it. Practitioners swore by it. The line between science and spirituality blurred, and patients often gravitated toward whatever gave them hope, even if it defied logic. As computers entered hospitals and homes, telemedicine began to take shape. Yet, alongside real innovation, scams proliferated. Pills, creams, and gadgets were sold online, promising miracle results. Slimming belts shocked abdominal muscles. Foot pads claimed to draw toxins overnight. Eye drops were marketed to permanently change iris color. It was an era where faith in modern medicine coexisted with a booming market for the fantastical. This duality, the rise of legitimate medical marvels alongside enduring, evolving strangeness, defined the final decades of the 20th century. The body became both a laboratory and a canvas, and people experimented with it endlessly in search of relief, beauty, youth, and peace. Medicine had come far, but in the end, the impulse to heal, by any means necessary, remained deeply, sometimes strangely human. As the 20th century drew to a close, medical practice entered a phase of unprecedented speed and accessibility. Technology accelerated everything: diagnosis, treatment, patient records, research. But with speed came saturation. The average person was now exposed to thousands of health claims, advertisements, and medical solutions every year. And into this whirlwind flowed not just science, but stories, many strange, some dangerous, and all deeply human. One of the most striking developments during this time was the rapid commercialization of psychopharmacology. The 1980s and 90s brought a cascade of psychiatric medications: SSRIs like Prozac and Zoloft, stimulants like Ritalin and Adderall, and mood stabilizers like lithium and valproate. These drugs changed lives, for the better, but they also changed the cultural conversation around mental health. Feeling sad for too long? Take a pill. Struggling with focus? There's a prescription for that. This pharmaceutical optimism paved the way for an era of diagnosis expansion, where new categories of disorder were regularly added to diagnostic manuals. Critics worried that normal sadness, shyness, and childhood energy were being pathologized. Others argued these changes made care more accessible. But one thing was clear: the relationship between emotion and medicine had entered a new phase, one where pills often preceded therapy and diagnoses were sometimes shaped by marketing. In this climate, nootropic drugs began their quiet rise. Marketed as smart drugs, they promised improved memory, faster learning, enhanced focus. Some were prescription medications used off-label. Others were over-the-counter supplements with exotic names: ginkgo biloba, pyracetam, L-theanine, bacopa monnieri. Their appeal lay not in healing illness, but in pushing human limits. Students, coders, executives, and athletes took them hoping for an edge. Some felt benefits. Others chased illusions. And then came the rise of biohacking, a grassroots movement where people applied scientific methods to their own bodies, often without medical supervision. Biohackers experimented with sleep cycles, caloric restriction, fasting protocols, and wearable tech. Some even implanted RFID chips under their skin or injected homemade gene therapies. It was science at its boldest and weirdest. Forums buzzed with debates over microdosing psychedelics, ice baths for dopamine regulation, or staring into red lights to increase mitochondrial activity. Amid these experiments, the placebo effect took on new meaning. Researchers continued to uncover just how powerful belief itself could be. Patients who were given sugar pills but told they were powerful medications often experienced real, measurable improvements in pain, mood, and even blood pressure. In some trials, open-label placebos, where the patient knew they were taking a placebo, still worked. This suggested that ritual, trust, and expectation might be as important as chemistry in some forms of healing. But placebos weren't the only mental force at play. The nocebo effect, where negative expectations lead to worse outcomes, was equally powerful. People told a treatment might cause headaches were more likely to develop headaches, even when the treatment was inert. Fear itself, it seemed, could shape physiology. This psychological power was a goldmine for marketers of fringe therapies. One particularly strange example was the quantum healing wand, a metal rod said to contain frequencies that could realign the body's cellular vibration. It had no real scientific basis, but it was packaged in sleek cases, accompanied by charts, testimonials, and pseudo-scientific jargon. Other devices included scalar energy bracelets, holographic stickers for the spine, and digital frequency patches said to modulate brainwaves. Similarly, energy healing diversified. Beyond Reiki and therapeutic touch, some practitioners offered aura cleansing, chakra alignment, or bioenergetic scanning. Clients lay on massage tables while machines allegedly scanned their energy fields and produced colorful readouts. To believers, it offered comfort. To skeptics, it was theater. But either way, it reinforced a truth. Medicine was no longer just about curing disease. It was about meaning, identity, and the sacredness of the self. The cosmetic medicine industry also embraced strange innovations. Snake venom creams promised wrinkle reduction. Bee sting facials became a celebrity favorite. Leech therapy returned, this time with sterile medical-grade leeches, used for post-surgical blood flow in cosmetic procedures. And with the rise of the internet, before and after images flooded screens, offering tantalizing transformations through non-invasive procedures like cryolipolysis, fat freezing, or ultrasound sculpting. Meanwhile, spiritual detoxes evolved into retreats and wellness vacations. People fasted for days, drank only green juices or maple syrup mixed with cayenne pepper, or ingested clay to absorb toxins. Some retreats offered soul surgeries, combining chants, light therapy, herbal steam baths, and spiritual counseling. The line between healing and performance had never been thinner or more profitable. And in the background, conspiracy theories about mainstream medicine flourished. Some believed vaccines caused autism. Others claimed that cancer cures were being hidden by pharmaceutical companies. Fear, fueled by fragmented media and rising distrust, created fertile ground for unorthodox remedies. The same environment that spawned snake oil salesmen in the 19th century had now gone digital. By the end of the 1990s, medicine had reached extraordinary heights. Organ transplants, robotic surgery, MRI scans. But the human craving for mystery, for agency, for transformation ensured that the strange, the symbolic, and the surreal remained part of our collective approach to healing. In the clinic, the body was dissected and studied. In the spa, it was revered. And in living rooms around the world, people mixed ancient herbs with modern supplements, following rituals they hoped would restore balance, beauty, or peace. And in doing so, they reminded us that healing is rarely just about the body. As the 20th century gave way to the new millennium, a curious cultural paradox settled in. The more medicine advanced, the more people turned to treatments rooted in belief, tradition, or sheer novelty. Despite the MRI machine, the gene sequencer, and the clinical trial, the human longing for meaning, transformation, and personalized healing never faded. In fact, it bloomed. Nowhere was this clearer than in the rapid rise of functional medicine, an approach that promised to treat the root cause of illness rather than its symptoms. Functional medicine practitioners blended lab testing with alternative therapies, personalized nutrition plans, and lifestyle coaching. While some of its strategies overlapped with good preventative care, others pushed the envelope, recommending extreme elimination diets, intense supplement regimens, or costly IV infusions. Critics warned it leaned on pseudoscience. Supporters swore it healed what conventional doctors dismissed. A similar philosophy fueled the bioidentical hormone craze. Promoted as a natural alternative to synthetic hormones, bioidentical treatments were used to balance estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone in aging adults. Compounded creams and troches were prescribed not just for menopause, but for fatigue, anxiety, low libido, even spiritual malaise. Though some found relief, others experienced side effects or hormone imbalances. Yet the idea of balancing your hormones became a powerful narrative, one that merged physiology with emotion. Meanwhile, detox. Culture became a health gospel. It wasn't enough to eat well or exercise. You had to purge, cleanse, flush, or reset. Products like activated charcoal smoothies, liver detox kits, and foot pads claiming to extract toxins sold by the millions. None were backed by meaningful evidence. The liver and kidneys, after all, are the body's natural detoxifiers, but the appeal wasn't scientific. It was ritualistic. The detox, like ancient purification rites, offered a psychological sense of renewal. The wellness world also introduced strange dietary dogmas. Food combining insisted that proteins and carbs couldn't be eaten together. The blood type diet claimed that your ancestry determined your ideal meal plan. The alkaline diet warned that acid-forming foods would cause inflammation and disease. Each theory came with charts, rules, and testimonials. None stood up to rigorous testing, but they offered a sense of control, order, and identity in a chaotic world. On the fringe, breatharianism emerged, the belief that one could live without food or water, sustained solely by light or spiritual energy. A few adherents gained media attention, claiming to have fasted for months. Investigations later revealed secret meals or hospitalization. Yet the allure of transcending biology remained seductive. If medicine could extend life, perhaps belief could liberate it. At the same time, technomedicine began interfacing with the body in surreal ways. People embedded biometric chips in their skin to monitor glucose, unlock phones, or access buildings. Wearable devices tracked sleep, steps, heartbeat, and stress. Some biohackers took it further, installing magnets in their fingertips, LED lights in their arms, or Bluetooth implants in their ears. Medicine was no longer just about healing. It was about enhancement, augmentation, evolution. Neurofeedback clinics promised to retrain the brain using real-time EEG data. Patients with anxiety, ADHD, or depression would sit with electrodes on their heads, watching moving images or playing games controlled by their brainwaves. Some reported improvements. Others called it expensive snake oil. But the draw was unmistakable. A window into the self, tuned with technology. Even within traditional medicine, strange practices endured. Patients paid for stem cell injections that hadn't passed FDA approval. Others traveled abroad for unregulated therapies, like placenta facials, shark cartilage infusions, or fetal tissue implants. Often these were experimental at best, exploitative at worst. Yet hope has always outrun caution. One of the most peculiar medical phenomena of this time was the rise of celebrity wellness gurus. Figures with no formal training began to influence public health, launching skincare lines, supplement brands, detox kits. Their authority came not from degrees, but from charisma, anecdote, and a curated lifestyle. People followed them not for prescriptions, but for vision, for the belief that health could be beautiful, luxurious, and personal. All the while, conspiracy theories continued to fester. Social media platforms amplified claims that sunscreen causes cancer, that 5G technology alters DNA, that big pharma suppresses natural cures for profit. The distrust wasn't new, but the tools to spread it had never been more powerful. In this environment, bizarre treatments didn't just survive, they thrived. By the century's end, modern medicine had conquered polio, mapped the human genome, and connected hospitals across continents. But it had also learned a humbling truth. Science could treat the body, but it could not replace the soul's hunger for mystery, meaning, and agency. And so, in homes and clinics across the world, people continued to drink herbs, meditate with crystals, shock their muscles with belts, and gaze into infrared saunas. Each ritual an echo of something ancient, yet wrapped in the glowing language of the modern. In this era, the bizarre was no longer on the fringe. It had become a feature of the mainstream. As the final years of the 20th century wound down, the world was undergoing a deeper shift. Medicine had transformed from a domain of doctors and hospitals to a terrain shaped by culture, commerce, and community. Health became a lifestyle, a brand, and a personal narrative. And in this environment, the strange became normal. The rise of alternative and complementary medicine, CAM, reflected this change. From acupuncture to Ayurveda, from herbalism to sound baths, practices once deemed fringe entered clinics, wellness centers, and even major hospitals. Some of these traditions offered real relief, especially for chronic pain or stress. Others worked primarily through ritual, comfort, and the powerful placebo. But their integration signaled something more, a hunger for care that wasn't cold, clinical, or rushed. In some cases, the rituals of healing overtook their therapeutic value. Cupping, for example, an ancient practice where heated cups are applied to the skin to create suction, gained popularity among athletes and celebrities. The circular bruises became badges of dedication. Whether or not the treatment improved circulation, it made people feel attended to, rooted in tradition, and proactive in their wellness. Essential oils became the modern talismans of this age. Marketed as cures for everything from insomnia to cancer, oils like lavender, frankincense, and peppermint were diffused, ingested, or applied to the skin. While some had genuine antimicrobial or calming properties, the industry ballooned into a billion-dollar business, fueled by multi-level marketing and miracle claims. The oils were less about medicine and more about mood, memory, and control. And then there were wellness diagnostics that walked a strange line between science and showmanship. Iridology claimed that the eyes could reveal internal diseases. Tongue mapping, drawn from traditional Chinese medicine, offered insight into digestion and emotions. Bioelectrical impedance scans promised to measure body fat, hydration, and even cellular health. For many, these tests offered something missing in modern clinics: attention, time, and interpretation. But this attention often came at a price, both literal and emotional. The commodification of health meant that those seeking healing were often sold hope wrapped in aesthetic packaging. Boutique supplements, organic serums, genetic testing kits, detox kits, hormone panels. Each product came with sleek design and a promise of self-optimization. Health had become not just a goal, but a luxury. The internet, too, shaped this era's strangeness. Forums and blogs allowed patients to bypass doctors and find communities of self-experimenters. People diagnosed themselves with adrenal fatigue, leaky gut, or heavy metal toxicity based on anecdotal symptoms and testimonial cures. While some found solidarity, others spiraled into misinformation and anxiety. The democratization of information brought freedom, but also fragmentation. In response, a new figure emerged: the health influencer, part nutritionist, part mystic, part entrepreneur. These individuals curated lives of visible wellness, smoothies, sunlight, serenity. Their advice blended science, story, and spectacle. They spoke of gut healing, hormone hacking, and vibrational alignment. Some had medical backgrounds, many did not, but they spoke to a truth often ignored in medicine. Healing is also emotional, social, and deeply personal. Within all this strangeness was a powerful thread: belief. The belief that the body could be restored, that aging could be reversed, that trauma could be released. These beliefs didn't always need evidence to feel real. They needed resonance, reassurance, ritual. And so the century ended with medicine poised at an inflection point. On one side, data, evidence, clinical trials. On the other, intuition, tradition, self-experimentation. Most people lived in the middle. They took antibiotics and saw chiropractors. They trusted vaccines but also drank green juice. They Googled their symptoms but still called their doctor. Because in the end, medicine was no longer just about curing disease. It had become a story we told ourselves about who we were, how we suffered, and what we hoped to become. As the calendar turned to the 21st century, medicine entered a new dimension. Technological marvels, from AI-powered diagnostics to personalized genetics, redefined what was possible. Yet alongside the sleek interfaces and robotic surgeries, the strange and the surreal did not fade. Instead, they re-emerged in new forms, often cloaked in modern language, reshaped by social media, and propelled by a culture obsessed with optimization. Let's begin with the world of wearables. Once limited to pedometers, wearable technology exploded with smartwatches, rings, and patches that could track heart rate, sleep cycles, stress levels, and even blood oxygen. Some devices claimed to predict illness before symptoms appeared. Others offered real-time ECG readings. These technologies empowered users, but also introduced new anxieties. Sleep scores became the new insomnia, where users felt worse not because they slept poorly, but because the data said they did. In parallel, the language of biohacking became mainstream. Silicon Valley executives fasted for days, took cold plunges at dawn, and wore blue light-blocking glasses at night. Nootropic stacks, customized blends of supplements for focus and creativity, were marketed as productivity tools. The goal was not just health, but peak performance. The strange had become a science of self-enhancement. One of the more surreal trends was the rise of IV therapy lounges. In upscale neighborhoods and airport terminals, people reclined in leather chairs while nurses hooked them up to drips of saline, vitamins, and antioxidants. Packages like the jet lag buster or hangover cure promised fast fixes for modern malaise. Some lounges added ambient lighting and Spotify-curated playlists. While helpful in cases of real dehydration or deficiency, these treatments were often used recreationally, less for healing than for feeling pampered, high-tech, and in control. Meanwhile, DNA testing entered the home. Kits from companies like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA allowed people to discover their ancestry, health risks, and even potential food sensitivities, all from a cheek swab. But as the data poured in, confusion followed. Was a gene marker for depression destiny? Could a 2% Neanderthal lineage explain your stubbornness? While genetic insight held promise, it also created new forms of medical myth, narratives of identity shaped by algorithms and probability charts. On the frontier of personalization came epigenetic testing, promising to tell you how your lifestyle was influencing your genes. Companies offered insights into your biological age, diet compatibility, and even mindfulness aptitude based on DNA methylation patterns, for a price, of course. Wellness had become not just a lifestyle, but a subscription model. In the world of mental health, strange therapies resurfaced under new names. Float tanks, once a fringe experiment, were now sold as sensory reset experiences. People paid to lie in dark, salt-filled chambers to ease anxiety and expand consciousness. Sound baths, where gongs, bowls, and harmonic tones were played to recalibrate mental states, became popular for treating burnout. While these practices offered peace and relaxation, they also revealed a growing disillusionment with conventional therapy, an urge to escape the talking cure for the sonic one. And in psychedelics, medicine took a bold, bizarre leap forward. After decades of prohibition, drugs like psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine returned, this time as therapeutic agents. Clinics opened offering ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for depression. Psilocybin trials showed promise in treating trauma and end-of-life anxiety. But in the margins, unlicensed retreats offered guided journeys in yurts or forest lodges, blending medicine with mysticism. Some found healing, others found confusion. The boundary between therapy and ritual was thin as ever. Meanwhile, influencers reshaped how health information spread. TikTok trends like chlorophyll water, raw carrot salad, or ice cube facials went viral. Some were harmless. Others were misleading, even harmful. A single clip could reach millions, far outpacing scientific studies or public health advisories. The authority of the white coat was replaced by likes, shares, and aesthetic perfection. In tandem, spiritual wellness blossomed into a full-blown economy. From moon ceremonies to manifestation workshops, healing became as much about energy as it was about anatomy. Breathwork, plant medicine, and trauma release therapies were offered in exotic retreats. Crystals were paired with coaching. Astrology was tied to gut health. And always, at the heart of it, was the desire not just to survive, but to feel whole. Yet even mainstream medicine adopted strange hues. Hospitals installed meditation rooms. Some offered acupuncture or aromatherapy alongside chemotherapy. Medical schools introduced empathy training through narrative workshops and improv. The once clear lines between science and spirit blurred. What mattered most, it seemed, was the patient's experience, their sense of being seen, heard, and supported. This was the age of curated care, of personalized protocols, of DIY diagnostics and digital diagnoses. And at its core, medicine remained a paradox, precise in its tools, yet profoundly shaped by perception. Because even in the age of artificial intelligence and genome mapping, people still turn to rituals, symbols, and stories to understand their bodies. In this strange new century, the bizarre had not vanished. It had simply evolved. In the early decades of the 21st century, the strange took on a new kind of shine. It wasn't dusty or whispered anymore. It glowed with the sleek interfaces of apps, the serene branding of wellness influencers, and the calculated language of biotech startups. Health became digitized, data-driven, but also more deeply immersed in myth than ever before. And in this hybrid world, where the algorithm met the altar, a new kind of bizarre medicine emerged, quietly, confidently, and in plain sight. Take, for example, the boom in digital diagnostics. Through mobile apps, people could now scan their moles, analyze their sleep cycles, track ovulation, monitor blood sugar, or even assess mood with voice AI. Some apps claim to detect depression based on phone usage patterns. Others offered health scores by measuring gait, typing speed, or eye movement. These tools were often fascinating and occasionally useful, but also dangerously seductive. People began to outsource self-awareness to software, believing their phone knew them better than they knew themselves. The emergence of digital twins took this to another level. Pioneered in precision medicine, digital twins are virtual replicas of a person's biology, built from their genetic data, health history, and real-time metrics. In theory, they could be used to simulate how a body would respond to a medication or intervention before it's ever administered. But to some, this concept felt like science fiction. Your other self, built in code, predicting your future. It blurred the lines between human and machine, between diagnosis and divination. Then came nutrigenomics, the promise that your genes could tell you exactly what to eat. Companies offered full-body optimization plans based on how you metabolize caffeine, processed fats, or react to gluten. While the science was still young and inconclusive, the idea was powerful. That buried in your DNA was a personal cookbook, waiting to be unlocked. The food pyramid was no longer universal. It was yours alone, curated by your genome. Alongside these highly technical trends came an explosion of low-tech yet equally strange self-care rituals. One of the most notable, tongue scraping. Borrowed from ancient Ayurvedic practices, it became a staple of modern bioalignment. Influencers filmed themselves each morning, scraping their tongues to remove toxins, improve digestion, and balance energy. The logic was vague, but the ritual was soothing, repetitive, and symbolic. A small battle won before breakfast. Another rising star was ear seeding, a variation on acupuncture that used tiny metallic beads or crystals placed on specific pressure points of the ear, held in place with adhesive. These seeds were believed to relieve stress, anxiety, and insomnia. The ear, practitioners claimed, was a map of the whole body. While clinical evidence was limited, the visual, glimmering constellations on the ear was captivating. At the same time, vaginal steaming made headlines, promoted as a way to cleanse and rejuvenate the womb using herbal-infused steam. The practice was ancient, but its revival in luxury spas was distinctly modern. Doctors warned against it, citing risks of burns and infection. Still, it appealed to a desire for connection with the body, ritualized femininity, and the perceived wisdom of older, earthbound cultures. Meanwhile, infrared saunas promised to detoxify at the cellular level, help with weight loss, and even reverse aging. They were marketed as a panacea, a solution to inflammation, anxiety, and toxin buildup. Users described them as healing cocoons, spaces of warmth, light, and silence. For some, the effect was real. For others, it was a performance of health, staged in soft amber light. The rise of psychedelics in therapy grew rapidly during this time. Clinics opened across cities, offering guided ketamine infusions or psilocybin experiences under medical supervision. But even outside the clinical setting, underground retreats, led by shamans or journey guides, catered to those seeking spiritual or emotional breakthroughs. These experiences, often highly choreographed with music, breathwork, and ceremonial tools, offered a modern version of the ancient vision quest. The body in these rituals was no longer just a vessel, it was a gateway. And then there was AI wellness coaching, virtual assistants trained on thousands of hours of health data and therapeutic dialogue, began guiding users through meditations, anxiety drills, gratitude journaling, and sleep routines. These digital mentors had no judgment, no fatigue. Some users formed emotional attachments to their bots. Others used them as daily confessional booths. Technology, once feared as sterile, had become intimate. At the edge of all this, medical aesthetic treatments multiplied. People underwent platelet-rich plasma injections, vampire facials, where their own blood was spun in a centrifuge and re-injected into their skin. Others received stem cell facials, gold thread lifts, or microcurrent face zaps that promised to lift and tone by mimicking the body's bioelectricity. Clinics became sanctuaries, rituals became procedures, and beauty became a form of health. It was a time when the body was not only seen, but curated, tracked, scanned, enhanced, ritualized. Medicine, in its strange 21st century form, had become a conversation not just between doctor and patient, but between self and self. between data and desire, between the ancient and the futuristic. And though it wore new clothes, its pulse remained the same. A need to understand, a need to heal, a need to believe. As we move further into the 21st century, the boundary between the bizarre and the conventional in medicine has all but vanished. What once might have been labeled strange, eccentric, or fringe is now often part of mainstream conversation. We live in an age where ancient rituals are packaged in sleek branding and high-tech diagnostics mimic the prophecy of oracles. The pursuit of health is no longer just about living longer. It's about controlling every breath, bite, and blink. Let us begin with one of the most symbolic trends of our time: health gamification. Using apps, smart rings, and wristbands, people began to approach their bodies as if playing a game. Steps counted, calories tracked, sleep stages monitored. Even water intake was logged. Leaderboards and achievement badges rewarded consistency. But underneath the smiles and dopamine hits lay a growing unease. When your body becomes a competition, even with yourself, health can quietly become stress. Meanwhile, fasting culture re-emerged, not as deprivation, but as optimization. Intermittent fasting, 16.8 schedules, prolonged water fasts, and dry fasting with no food or water were promoted as pathways to autophagy, clarity, and spiritual reset. Social media influencers chronicled 72-hour fasts, blood glucose dips, and their post-fasting euphoria. Some even took it further, engaging in dopamine fasting, where they avoided all stimuli, screens, music, talking, even eye contact, to reset their reward. Systems. Other practices took root in the realm of light and sound therapy. Devices emitting red and near-infrared light claim to stimulate mitochondria, heal skin, improve mood, and regulate hormones. Some were helmets for the brain. Others were full-body panels used daily like a spiritual tanning booth. Binaural beats, sound frequencies said to induce meditative or creative brain states, were piped into ears through headphones. Some believed in their power to unlock cognition. Others simply enjoyed the tranquil buzz of engineered harmony. In cities across the world, wellness architecture became a niche. Buildings were designed with circadian lighting, EMF shielding, air ionization, and biophilic features. Natural elements believed to reduce stress. Water features, soundscapes, and scent dispensers turned corporate spaces into temples of micro-relaxation. The home was no longer just shelter, it was a therapeutic device. At the same time, the search for immortality, once the realm of legend, returned under the banner of longevity science. Tech billionaires invested in blood transfusions from younger donors, full-body MRI scans, and gene editing research. Cryonics regained popularity, with companies preserving bodies, or just brains, after death, hoping for resurrection through future science. Some began uploading their consciousnesses into virtual memorials, creating chatbots that mimicked their speech. Legacy became digital echo. Elsewhere, AI-driven diagnostics promised the future of precision medicine. Algorithms read X-rays, assessed lab values, and even predicted disease risk. Some apps could diagnose skin conditions with a camera scan, yet others warned of bias, false positives, and the danger of machines replacing empathy. In the rush for efficiency, the human elements, fear, confusion, grief, were sometimes left behind. As the COVID-19 pandemic swept the globe, another layer of medical strangeness emerged. Quarantines led to DIY health experiments. Homemade ventilators, herbal immunity kits, and speculative treatments. Misinformation mingled with science. Some drank bleach. Others took veterinary medicine. Masks became political. Vaccines became ideology. The body was no longer just a vessel. It was a battlefield for belief. And throughout all of this, conspiracy medicine flourished. Snake oils and miracle cures returned with digital virality. People questioned everything: ingredients, motivations, institutions. Distrust grew not just from ignorance, but from experience. Rushed approvals, past abuses, corporate corruption. In the vacuum left by confusion, the strange became seductive. Still, amid the noise, real miracles occurred. Cancer treatments became more targeted. Organs were printed with bioprinters. Paralysis was reversed with neural implants. Rare diseases were cured with gene therapy. And yet, the same species that mapped the genome also used healing crystals to align their chakras. Because for all our advancements, medicine is not just a science. It is a mirror. It reflects our culture, our fears, our hopes. It is shaped by who we are and who we dream of becoming. We live in a world where a person might get a robotic-assisted surgery in the morning and meditate with Palo Santo in the evening, where someone might take a pill designed by AI while wearing a copper bracelet against radiation, where health is no longer a destination, but a curated identity. And in this strange new reality, perhaps the most bizarre thing is how normal it all feels. As we reach the final chapter of this long, meandering journey through the history of bizarre medical practices, we find ourselves not at a finish line, but at a threshold. Because medicine, for all its breakthroughs, has never been just about biology. It has always been about belief, about ritual, about the profoundly human desire to make sense of suffering and to reclaim power from the unknown. From ancient shamans dancing around fires, to modern doctors diagnosing from data points, from bloodletting to brain implants, from mystical vapors to magnetic wristbands, the history of healing is a tapestry of both genius and folly. And the strange, it has never been a footnote. It has always been the heart of the story. Why is this so? Perhaps it is because the human body is not just an organism. It is a vessel for fear, for faith, for memory. When something goes wrong inside us, we don't only ask, how do I fix this? We ask, why me? What does this mean? How can I change it? And medicine, whether through syringes or spells, has always tried to answer both the physical and the philosophical. Even the most bizarre practices, looked at closely, are often expressions of hope. The leeches, the lobotomies, the mercury drinks, they weren't used out of cruelty. They were used because at the time, they seemed to offer answers. They were rituals performed in the face of uncertainty. And if we judge them harshly, it should not be with ridicule, but with humility. Because our own age is not free of strangeness. We too wear devices on our wrists to tell us how we slept. We too believe in detoxes, light therapies, and mindfulness hacks. We too pay for the feeling of control, even when the science is thin. The story of bizarre medicine is also a story of social change. It reveals what we feared: evil spirits, miasmas, radiation, sugar. It reveals what we longed for: purity, energy, balance, youth. And it reveals who held power: the priest, the physician, the shaman, the algorithm. Each era's healers were shaped not just by knowledge, but by culture. And as cultures evolved, so did the rituals. The barbershop became the hospital. The poultice became the prescription. The spell became the supplement. And yet, beneath it all, the impulse remained the same: to ease pain, to prolong life, to feel whole. If there's a lesson to be drawn from this strange history, perhaps it's this: That healing is not always linear, it's not always rational, and it's not always sterile. Sometimes healing is messy, creative, even theatrical. Sometimes it involves the mind more than the molecules, and sometimes the strangest things work, not because of what they are, but because of what they mean to the person receiving them. So where do we go from here? Into an even stranger future, one where AI may write prescriptions, where surgeries may be performed by nanobots, where mental health may be monitored by emotion-sensing glasses, where dreams might be decoded, where illness may be treated before it begins. And yet, where some will still light candles, rub oils, whisper affirmations, and wear crystals close to the skin. And perhaps that is not a contradiction. Perhaps it is just what it means to be human, to seek patterns in chaos, to search for comfort in confusion, to make rituals out of the unknown, to heal, not just the flesh, but the story we carry about who we are. This is the history of bizarre medicine, and it is, in a way, the history of us all.